So a far less catchy phrase for ensh ttification would be a race to the bottom. And I'm always curious, broadly speaking, why this happens. I mean, if you believe in the beautiful version of capitalism, it's supposed to lead to a race to the top where companies compete to do better and to make better products in order to do better in the market. And it seems in your book and in your telling of this that these were deliberate strategies taken by companies in order to allow the process of ensh ttification. And if it was deliberate, why? Is it just easier that way than it is to compete? And what fundamental forces enable the race to the bottom?
Yeah, so I actually don't think it was internal forces. I don't think it's endogenous. I think it's exogenous. I think endogenously, the pressure on firms is to lower the amount of money you spend on products, lower the amount of money you give to workers and suppliers, and maximize the amount of money retained by the firm. But in a state of nature, a firm cannot charge infinity dollars and pay $0 to its workforce unless it's an academic publisher, in which case that is how it operates. And the thing that prevents firms from doing this is the fear of a competitor. But of course, we stopped enforcing antitrust law. We stopped preventing horizontal mergers. But we also didn't want to enforce vertical mergers either. We subscribed to industrial organization theory that said vertical mergers were uniquely safe. The only time the state should intervene in a merger is if we know for sure that the merger is intended to be anti-competitive. And of course, if you don't want to ever prevent a merger, that's a great standard, because how will you ever find out what the intention of a tech boss is? Unless, of course, that tech boss is Mark Zuckerberg, who never had an illegal impulse he didn't commit to email that was later discovered by a prosecutor. And so Mark Zuckerberg sent an email at like 2:30 in the morning to his CFO that was like, yeah, we are buying Instagram. The reason we're spending $1 billion on a company with 12 employees, which you seem to think is crazy, is because people are leaving Facebook and going to Instagram and not coming back. So we'll recapture those users here. This is like sending a memo that says like, Bob, that guy we were talking about killing, just so you know, it's definitely going to be a murder. And I was just thinking about it. I'm probably premeditating it right now. Right. And yet the Clinton administration waved that merger through. Right.
Obama administration. Obama.
I beg your pardon. You're right. No, the Obama administration. Yes, it would be amazing if the Clinton administration had waved that merger through. And so, this is like, we had just no competition law enforcement, and we got monopolies. And, you folks working for an economics podcast might appreciate just how frustrating it is for someone like me to hear economists describe the cartelization of every sector in our economy as being unrelated to the pro-monopoly policies of economics, right? It's like we used to not have a rat problem and we were putting down rat poison. And then like these guys came along and said, you probably don't need the rat poison. You should stop putting it down. And now rats are eating our faces off. And they're like, well, why are you blaming me? Right? Maybe it's like sunspots that created the time of the rat and made them more fecund than at any time in history. And of course, it is true the rats did buy the rat poison factories and shut them down. But so what? We're not using rat poison. That's like an economically rational outcome. This is like Pareto optimal, And so we stop enforcing competition, and then like we lose another source of discipline, which is regulation. And, we think of these as separate domains, but the collective action problem that 100 SMEs have goes away when it's a cartel of 5 companies. They can decide on what they're going to tell their regulator. They're not engaged in what Peter Thiel calls a wasteful competition. So they have lots of free cash flow that they can devote to policy entrepreneurship. And they can make their policy preferences felt. And so, why are so many of the tech monopolies making so much money from spying on us? Well, maybe it's because we haven't passed a new privacy law since 1988, when Ronald Reagan got so angry about Robert Bork's video rental history being leaked to the newspapers that he signed a law that bans video rental history disclosure without permission. And that's the last privacy violation that Congress has seen fit to prohibit. Right. So like regulatory capture. Right. And then, we had other forms of regulation that firms didn't avoid, but rather mobilized, like IP law. And when they cartelized, they were able to weaponize the IP law in order to protect their cartels. And then they had to worry about their workforce, because their workforce is very strong because they were valuable. But then when you have a cartel, they can gang up on their workers too. And eventually supply meets demand. You see 500,000 tech layoffs in the last 3 years. This endless, like, disgustingly horny talk about AI replacing programmers, which is really just, AI doesn't do software engineering. It just writes little chunks of code. Software engineering is a thing that requires a lot of context, which is the thing that AI cannot do. You cannot get a large language model to think really hard about what happened before and what's going to happen afterwards and what's happening adjacently, because that is geometrically more computationally expensive than just writing one routine. And so, it's not that they think they're going to replace programmers with AI. It's that they think they're going to frighten programmers by talking about replacing them with AI. And so the power of programmers gets broken too. And then we just end up in a situation where the guys who get up every morning in the suite, go to the C-suite, grab the giant lever on the wall marked ensh ttification and pull it as hard as they can, no longer have it gummed up by competitors or regulators or interoperability or an empowered workforce. It just moves very freely. It's been totally lubricated by policy choices. And then we get ensh ttification.
Of course, you're right. The incentives are to pay the least and to sell at the highest price possible, etc. And the big insight of Adam Smith is that competition fixes these problems and delivers desirable outcome. However, the competition that Adam Smith is talking about is competition on prices or on quality. And very often competition takes different forms. And those don't deliver the same good outcome that Adam Smith predicted. So if we are competing in trying to make it more difficult to leave the jail in which we are the customer in, or if we are competing trying to make it difficult for you to leave and choose somebody else, that's a terrible competition, is very destructive. And this is where I think the antitrust authorities should intervene massively, because this is clearly incredibly welfare destroying. And this is when Google is making its product worse in order to make more money. This is like unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
And this is what the problem is, that I think economists have not recognized, and of course policymakers even more so, how devastating this dimension is.
Yeah, I think that's well put. And I do think that this is an area where, like, the neo-Brandeisians sometimes have a blind spot, where competition for its own sake gets reified. So I remember there was an op-ed in The Sling, which is a excellent publication, written by this guy who works for one of the advocacy groups, like ad industry groups in the UK, who was talking about attribution. So this is a thing that the ad industry is totally obsessed with. It is the idea that after I show you an ad programmatically, I follow you around in the physical world. I look at all of your credit card transactions, and I look at everything you do on the internet until I figure out whether you bought the thing that I showed you the ad for. And this is a thing that Google and Meta are uniquely suited to do. It's one of those things you do get returns to scale from, and smaller firms cannot, and so they can't compete. Right. And so the point of this industry lobbyist, who also managed to sneak something into one of the Competition Markets Authority's reports, the one on ad tech, is that this is an unfair competitive advantage, and we should address it by making it easier for smaller firms to do attribution. And his answer to this is assigning every Briton a permanent advertising identifier at birth that can be used to track all their actions. And it's the most insane goddamn thing. But if if you believe in competition as an end instead of as a means, right? I think of competition as embodying John Sherman's idea that if we would not have a king, we shouldn't have an autocrat of trade. That what we want to do is not allow, a inbred, merged cartel that's they've screwed so many of each other that they've got a corporate Habsburg jaw to, like, just take over our sector and structure our markets and our lives. And I want competition to turn them into a rabble who are at each other's throats, so that we can have effective regulation. And I say this to my libertarian friends all the time. Look, even if you are so Elon Musk addled that your copy of the Fountainhead can no longer be read because the pages are all stuck together, and the only thing that you think that a regulator should do is enforce contracts, they still have to be powerful enough to enforce contracts, right? They have to be more powerful than the entities they're enforcing the contracts among. The referee has to be able to boss the players around, otherwise they won't play by the rules. And so the smallest government you're ever going to get is going to be determined by the largest corporation you're willing to tolerate. And so even if you're a small government person, I think you should want sectors organized around SMEs and not around large dominant firms. I mean, IBM was in antitrust litigation with the DOJ for 12 consecutive years. And every year it outspent the entire DOJ on outside counsel to fight the DOJ antitrust division, right? When a corporation can outspend the federal government for 12 consecutive years, it's going to be really hard to stop it from cheating.
So another version of this question, and I think your views on this might have changed over time, is do enshittified firms die, or when do they die?
Yeah.
And is it simply the speed of enshittification, like the proverbial frog in the boiling water? And for some reason, I think you've become, reading your work makes me think that you've become more cynical over time, that you once maybe believed that enshittified firms did die, and now you think they might be vampiric and they might have life forever. Am I right about that? And is there any line or any sort of set of characteristics you can draw to say when they might meet their deserved fate?
So I call them zombies and not vampires, but otherwise I agree. I think that they're well past the time we should have double tapped them and stuffed them in a shallow grave, but that we struggle to. We're trapped in their rotting carcasses. And I guess when I wrote initially in that first blog post that and then they die, that it was more wish casting than anything. I think that like they're not bad at finding the minimum quantum of value that will keep us stuck there, at least until they don't, right? At least until something exogenous happens that tips the equilibrium from I hate this place, but I can't stop using it, and I hate this place and I'm not going to use it anymore. And so far they've been able to often recover from that. Facebook has had several of these live stream mass shootings and other things that have provoked bolts for the exits, and sometimes has provoked like weird strategy changes at Facebook, like Mark Zuckerberg announcing that the future wouldn't consist of arguing with your most racist uncle using the primitive text interface that he created in his Harvard dorm to non-consensually rate how bangable the fellow undergrads were, but rather that he was going to convert you and everyone you love into a legless, sexless, low polygon, heavily surveilled cartoon character so he can imprison you in a virtual world he stole from a 25-year-old cyberpunk novel he called The Metaverse. But, for the most part, these firms have hung on despite these missteps. And I think that should alarm us, right? I think that there's like there's a kind of caricature neoliberal version of this where you say, actually, no, this is just revealed preferences. People don't dislike Facebook. If they did, they'd have left, right? In the same way that like if you sell your kidney for rent, you have a revealed preference for one kidney, right? But if you acknowledge that people sometimes make hard choices, and those hard choices arise out of like policy frameworks, right? Like if you have no tenancy protections, then people might have to sell their kidneys for rent. And if you allow firms to exclude new market entrants, purchase their competitors, engage in a raft of sleazy conduct, spy on their users and so on, then they might be able to lock their users in long past the time when they would have left. And the thing that I worry about now is not whether these firms will die, because I think they will eventually. It's the harm they'll do on the way and the harm they'll do when they go. Because the thing that you really want, especially in these social platforms, but also in other platforms like banks and so on, is you want to evacuate them. You don't want them to just collapse, right? Like there are lots of very bad banks. And one of the reasons we step in when those banks are failing, rather than allowing them to just fail, is that the depositors suffer substantial harms if we just allow nature to take its course. And in the same way, people on Facebook are there because they have really important social relationships with each other. It's why they're still there. In fact, it's the great tragedy of Facebook is they have weaponized the things that matter most to us. And they are always seeking an equilibrium where the harms from losing everything Facebook gives you are just slightly outweighed by the harms Facebook is choosing to inflict on you to benefit its shareholders. And that's why I think this is a policy matter and not a matter of us shopping incorrectly or even the wickedness of Facebook's management.